Praise the Lord. We want to welcome you out to our Sunday school. This morning I was giving some people a bit of tours. The daycare is gone. Glory to God. You can tell by the dumpster, which I'm going to have a little conversation with them about that, but it's a very exciting time. And so I'll make this announcement again in the service, but if you want to see just some of the thoughts we're having, nothing's locked in stone yet. But I'll be glad to give a little tour after the service. And so thank God. We are going to be concluding our Sunday school on growing graceful in the seasons of life. I've covered different phases of life, different areas. Life in general has its flow. Nothing stays stagnant. You just realize that as you grow. We looked at being a teenager, serving God, dating, getting married, having young kids, having teenage kids, being empty nesters, beginning to grow older in life. And so I want to look with you this morning about the last one which is just going to be very practical about preparing for the inevitable. And so it's very important. So let's get a few scriptures. I need our text, Psalms 90, verses 10 through 12. Who would get that? Carrie. And then I need Psalms 90. We're going to look again at verse 10. Who would get that? Jeremy. Hebrews 9 and verse 27. Steph Walton. Philippians chapter 1, 21 and 22. Aiden. Psalms 128 and verse 6. Mom. And I'll have a few more, but let's get through this first section this morning. Psalms 90, verses 10 through 12.
The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. Who knows the power of your anger? For as the fear of you, so is your wrath. So teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom.
Teach us to number our days. The New Living Translation says, teach us to realize the brevity of life. And so, if we're going to grow graceful, we're going to have to understand you're going to die. And I don't mean to, that's a bummer. I don't want to think about it. That's part of the problem that many people face. They don't want to think about that. But it is guaranteed. So far, 2 people have made it off the planet without dying. In the estimated 15, 16 billion people that have ever lived, your odds are not good. Now, I understand Jesus is coming. I understand that the rapture is coming and we're going to go to heaven. If that is the case, then this study will not it will be null and void it will be preempted for a better event. But that being said, we need to give our hearts to wisdom, and part of wisdom is the preparation that we will not be here forever. You have to just grasp that. Psalms 90, verse 10, our text.
The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. Okay, so here Moses says 70 years. The average American male in the United States is about 72 point something. The average female is 76-ish. That's the average. So there are, for every one that is 90, there is someone who died in their 30s. Okay, just grasp that. And average means average. That means there are as many more than less. And so you have to get a hold of that we are guaranteed no guarantees. Which is a profound statement if you think about it.
You're guaranteed no guarantees. And so that is just the reality that we have to face. Some make it more, some make it less, but the reality that we all will face, whether Jesus comes or that day happens, your life on planet Earth, as you know it now, will end. Now, some of that is to be looked forward to, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But it is a hard reality, and a lot of people don't want to face this. And so that's why I'm going to talk about some very practical things. Hebrews 9 and verse 27.
And as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this, the judgment.
Okay, it is appointed. Now, some say, in the extreme Calvinistic view, your time is your time. There's no way you can change it. It is what it is. I don't lean that way, because people make foolish decisions. They rush the process. They live crazy. They drive crazy. And there's even people who do. I don't believe it was the will of God for them to take their own life, but they did. And so what I believe the scripture is saying here is that each one of us is going to die. I don't know that, as one comedian said, I know when I'm going to die because my birth certificate has an expiration date. I don't think that there's a date in heaven that it's marked down that this is your last day on planet Earth. Sometimes we know that. Sometimes we don't. And so the hard reality is that this is going to happen. To a Christian, that shouldn't be a horrible thought. It shouldn't be the worst, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, because we know we get so much more and better after we die. That's just part of being a Christian, is going to heaven. That we're looking forward. I'm looking forward to going to heaven. One of my favorite verses, I've shared it many times, Revelation 22:4, and then we will see his face. I can't wait to see Jesus' face. That's going to be a glorious, glorious time. There'll be the reunion of those who have gone before us. There'll be the reunion of those who we've just read about or know about. Whether they be from the Bible like Peter or Gideon or David, or whether they be like men and women of church history, such as William Carey and Hudson Taylor. Whether they be people that we've lost as loved ones. Philippians 1, did we read that? Philippians 1, 21 and 22.
For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, yet which I shall choose, I cannot tell.
One translation, which is better, I don't know. I'm able to do things here on earth and be effective for God, but I could get a chance to get away from all this garbage down here. This is Paul writing, he's going through persecutions and jails and betrayals and days and nights in the sea and whippings and beatings and stonings and all that. He's going, heaven doesn't look so bad right at the moment. Right? And so he's looking at this, that when we get to heaven, there's the hope of the perfect body. No more aches and pains, no more health issues, no more sickness. It's just something to look forward to. But all of that being said, we're talking about growing graceful in the seasons of life. I want to live it out till it's the end. I want to see the blessing and the purpose that God has for me. Psalms 128 and verse 6.
Yes, may you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel.
May you live and enjoy your grandchildren. Some of you just got kids, and you're thinking, yeah, they can be a handful. I remember those days of toddlers and babies and diapers and diaper bags and, 3 o'clock feedings and all of it. Well, my wife was a gem. I don't really remember a lot of 3 o'clock feedings, but grandkids living on, the reward of many different ways. And we were talking with our grandson down in Florida this morning. He's finally alert that when we're on the phone, he runs over to it. He laughs with us and such. He's getting there. Life in its flow, we have the reality that it goes on and that we need to prepare for that day. It's inevitable. As young as you are, you might think, I've got lots of time, and I pray that you do. But the reality is it comes up on all of us. And so, let me give out a few more scriptures. I need 1 Thessalonians 4 in verse 13 and 14. Who would get that? Jeremy? Proverbs 13:22. Steph? Darlene, would you get Psalm 17 and verse 14? And then I need 2 Corinthians 12:14. Sawyer. Okay. And then we're going to get into the crux of what I want to talk about this morning. But I want to lay a theological foundation for this. We touch one another's lives, and so that is what we're really preparing for in death. That's what we're really thinking about. If it was just you to yourself, there's not much need. If you're not touching other people's lives, if there aren't people responsible that you're responsible for, that you have an impact on, that you make a difference in their life, that's what preparing for that day is talking about. 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 and 14.
But I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus.
Okay, so again, if Jesus comes, what I'm talking about, much of this won't be needed and necessary. But the reality is he's talking about sorrowing for those who have died, because we do touch other people's lives. And even as Christians, to know that they're in a better place. To maybe, if they were sick or suffering or in pain, that you are relieved, but you still miss them. There's still a void that is left because someone's passed away. I saw recently a man advertising a book, and it's called My Dad's Life, and the thought was to get it to your dad while he's alive. The man's dad passed away, and he realized he didn't know that much about it. It's just him to jot down memories, grandparents, funny stories, anecdotes, whatever, before they pass away, so that you have a bit of a living legacy. That the thought there is we're intertwined, and so when someone leaves, it hurts. There's a void. Now Paul says we're not as sorrowful as those who have no hope. We know we'll see them again, but that still doesn't replace the loss in this life. And so what he's mentioning here is in the church in Thessalonica, they were all convinced Jesus was coming, as every believer should be. But when people started dying, some people had some hard time with this. Corinth, he has to write a whole chapter. Chapter 15 deals with that very understanding. They're like, well, if people are dying, did we miss the rapture? And that's how much they believed Jesus was coming. that quickly. That being said, it is on us then to provide and to be responsible to make that transition easier. It's on us that we should be looking at some very practical issues to grow gracefully in those final years. Proverbs 13:22.
A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous.
Okay, and so inheritance is a biblical theme. Things that are passed on, things that are come down. Some of this could be simply in the terms of money. Some of this could be in the terms of heirlooms. Some of this could be in the terms of culture. But the reality is that to pass down, we're going to talk about that in just a minute, but that thought of laying up or being prepared in that realm. Psalms 17, verse 14.
By the power of your hand, O Lord, destroy those who look to this world for their reward, but satisfy the hunger of your treasured ones. May their children have plenty, leaving an inheritance for their descendants.
May their children have plenty, leaving an inheritance for their descendants. So again, this is biblical. This is something that we need to consider. Finally, same thought again, 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 14.
Now I am ready to visit you for the third time, and I will not be a burden to you, because what I want is not your possessions, but you. After all, children should not have to save up for their parents, but parents for their children.
And so he's talking here again about making preparation, parents. This isn't to say that there sometimes roles change. Sometimes children of grown adult children need to begin to try to take care of some of the responsibility of their parents. That's not wrong. In fact, that's very biblical, and that's such in that role. But in general, it is the responsibility of the parents to take care of the children, to pass that on, so that then they can go on, have their own children, and take care of them. And so this is the biblical foundation I want to put out there. And then we're going to spend the next 20, 25 minutes in our Sunday school talking about some very practical areas. So are there any questions to this point? We're going to get into some areas, and I'm going to make a preface statement in the beginning of this. Okay, so I want to deal with 4 different areas that you need to think about, no matter what age you have, but especially if you have now children. And one of them is you need a will. Talking about growing gracefully in the seasons of life, you need a will. A mistake that people will make is that everything will automatically be transferred to my spouse. That is not necessarily true. We met a woman in our neighborhood. She was moving to a very sweet woman. My wife got to pray with her. She was having a yard sale, and so she got to pray with her and such, but she was leaving the next day for North Carolina and such. But she had a boat. Her husband had a boat. And the boat was titled in his name, not in hers. When he passed away, it took them over a year in probate to finally get her to the place where she could sell the boat, because it was not mentioned specifically in the will. You need a will. If you are married, it is wise to have both names on any deeds you have, any titles. Your car should be titled in both names. Your house, if you own a house, should be titled in both names. There's reasons for that, because then it transfers automatically. Then you're all set. Then there's no issues. It's automatic. It's an either or. All bank accounts, I could wax eloquent here on when couples have separate bank accounts. For anything other than tax reasons, I'm not a fan. Sometimes there's tax issues that they've got to do that for. But name should be on it. And in fact, if you're older, you ought to have one of your kids' names on one of your accounts, so that they can have access to, if something, God forbid, happens to you and your spouse at the same time. Another major part of a will that some of you are saying, well, I'm young, I'm in my 30s, I'm in my 20s, I don't need to think about it. If you have children, and God forbid something happens to you, who's going to raise your children? Who have you named as the one who will take your children? This has to be in writing, otherwise you can tie up lots of legal wrangling in court for months and months and months. I'm still dealing with, now there's reasons of people being stubborn, but we started this probate process when my mother's boyfriend passed away, February of last year. We are still not complete. It is still, thank God I don't have to keep running to Florida anymore, but it's still not over. It's still dragging out. And this month, November, it should be done. But we'll see. We will see. So that's a year and a half on a man who his only two real true assets were a pretty extensive gun collection and a house. That was it. All the vehicles that were there were all my mother's and in her name, or hers and his, and a lot of you know I ended up with a truck that I'm not a truck guy, and so, but you know, it's still in court. If you have young children, it needs to be in writing who you want to raise your children if, God forbid, something happened to you both. Growing graceful in the seasons of life. The older you get, the more important a will is. If you own a house, the more important a will is. If you've only got a couple of cars and you rent and you don't care, then that's fine. But if you have responsibility and a few possessions, then you need to be thinking about a will. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on television, so I'm not going to try to give you legal advice here. But I would say this. For simple wills, there are places online that will do it. But usually they cost just about as much because the lawyers know that as you sitting down with a lawyer and actually writing a will. And so it's important. How do you want your assets divided? It doesn't have to be complicated. My wife and I haven't made it complicated. If something happened to us both at the same time, then our kids can split. I hope they don't actually physically cut my double neck, but they can split what we have. Right? They figure that out. Leave it to them. They can do that. There are oral things that will not hold up in court. If I said to you, hey, you know what? If something happened to me, I want you to raise my kids, and then I don't put that in writing, you can't go to the judge with that and have any kind of long-term standing, because what if Mom, sometimes, and I'll just put this out there, you can weigh this through. Sometimes people will pick their parents. God forbid, something happens to me, my parents do it. Well, what if you trust one set of parents and not the other? Just grasp that. What if you say, hey, his parents are good, my parent, her parents are not so good, we want his parents to, and then her parents go to court and say that's not fair. But if you put it in writing, it's done. Assets. There are different kinds, and I'm just going to touch on this because, again, I'm not a lawyer. I did do some research, but I thought this is a rabbit hole that we could go down and not come up in. But one is there are different kinds of ways to do this. Some are wills and some are trusts. Trusts would be if you have assets, houses, stocks, these kinds of things that you want to put into a trust that then does not have to go through probate. You can also put on certain different deeds, titles, accounts, and which would be like putting a son or daughter on the account, something like that. Or is another word you can use where they and or pretty interchangeable. But at some places you can put on the terms or the account on death, transfer to X. And you can do that. That's especially true if you have any kind of financial assets. Some kind of stock portfolio you can put on there for an or at death kind of thing. And so basic will, everything on our wills basically say, if I die, my wife gets everything. If she dies, I get everything. If we die together, our kids split it. If for some reason one of them has passed, then the portion would fall to my grandkids. And so, very simple will, nothing very complicated about it. It does need to be notarized at the very least to be enacted. You would at least need a notary, if not a lawyer. That in the same token, you ought to think about well, we'll get to that in just a minute. But you also need to think about someone who will execute your will. In some places they're called administrators, in other places they're called, what's the word? Just executor of the will. Thank you. And so you name someone that they are going to take care of it. When I was in Prescott, I had asked Chris Hart to do it. Since we've moved, it's not practical for him. But I found someone who's not emotionally attached to it. You can name us, if you have 2 kids and you trust one more than the other, name that one, that's fine. There's legal obligations. The big word is fiduciary duties. That, they can't just willy-nilly do things. There is a bit of a small payment to do that they would receive. But you need to also have someone you trust who will execute it in a correct way, especially, again, if you have children, that they will stand and say no, and because families can get strange at that point. And so you've got to think that through. Any questions on that? Comments? Okay, I told you there's going to be really just simply practical stuff. And so I know some of you are young and you probably haven't thought about that. The second thing I want to talk about, which is related to that, is also life insurance. If you are the main breadwinner of your family, you need life insurance. The general rule of thumb, which may need to be relooked at, but from what I read years ago, and I'll just stick with this because it works basic. If you're married and have no children at home, either you're pre-kids or you're empty nesters, or you're not going to have kids, whatever it is, 5 times your annual income is probably sufficient. Again, probably a little low, but 5 times. So for instance, let's just take a medium kind of easy income at $50K. You make $50,000 a year. Your minimum insurance should be $250,000. I would add to that is if you have a mortgage, that should even be a separate policy to cover that. And so I actually right now have 3 different. My wife and I got, and the younger you are, the cheaper it is. But we got one back, and then when we bought the house, I got another one, and then I got a third one because it was only $12 a month for accidental death, which is, and that's a 10-year term, which will take us out, and most of our house will be probably taken care of by then. So the thought there was that if something happened to me in an accident, she would be all set. Now again, she'd miss me. I hope you'd miss me. You'll miss me, right, baby? You'd miss me, right? But to grow graceful, you got to think about taking care of those who may be left. If you have children at home, that figure then rises to 10 times your annual figure. So if you were making $50,000 a year for easy numbers, you need at least $500,000 of life insurance. That is to take care of your spouse and your children through the transition. When my father passed away, long, crazy stories of how there was a lot of gaps. He had bought into a retirement package and had said, if I work there 15 years, then it will automatically pay out no matter what. He worked there 11 when he died in a car accident, and they sent my mother the check of the balance that he had contributed, and that was it. My mother also didn't get Social Security because she had worked for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, not for not a regular kind of job where the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had their own system, so therefore she did not have her 40 quarters in the system. To this day, she still doesn't have her 40 quarters because she spent her time as a teacher in the schools of Boston, and then after my father died, she went back to work and ended up buying back her time, which was quite an amazing feat for her, and working for the DOR, which is the Department of Revenue. First she worked in boats, and then in cars, and then finally in child support. And so she was able to get, and she has a retirement, which is about the equivalent to, but what she would have got for Social Security, but yeah, a little bit better actually, but basically that was it. But when my father died, there was no income. My brother and I received a check for a very short time. I think mine went till I was 16. I think it was 8 months that she got support for me because then I was working. But my father realized he had gotten sick. It's a long, crazy story. He had gotten zapped by a nuclear power plant. No, it's another time for that story. But he took out some life insurance. And because of that, he also got mortgage insurance. He got a number of different things that when he did pass away, he knew he was sick, that my mother got some money and was able to take care of us and to not have to worry about some things as a result of that. And he died at 42 years old with 2 teenagers at home. And so life is not predictable. And so I thank God my father did plan for that and was able to cover our needs. Because I've heard other horrible situations where people didn't have insurance and now they're in, mom's working 3 jobs and they're going to lose the house and they're going to lose the, and this and that because Dad didn't think it through. And so you need term life insurance. It's a very inexpensive way to go. Okay, I think I have $700,000 if I were to die in an accident, and it's under $100 a month for me. And I got most of my insurance after one policy I got right before we turned 50. The others I've gotten in my 50s, and it's still that inexpensive. I wouldn't call the radio commercial about Big Lou. That seems a little sketchy, but there are others out there that you can find. You can talk to credit unions will have that. Term life insurance, you can do a search for it on the internet. You're probably talking $30, $40 a month. And, like any other insurance, it's always like, why am I spending this if I don't need it? Well, then when you need it, it's too late to go get it. And so, especially if you're healthy. And I recommend term because, one, whole life is it's more expensive. It's a bad savings plan. There's a whole number of different reasons why I would say that. The other reason I'd say is things change. What are you in 20 years from now? Your kids would be old enough that you wouldn't be worrying about whether I had 10 times the amount. Now I can reduce it to 5, and although I'm in my 40s or 50s, I don't have to worry about spending that kind of money. So that's another practical way, because life is brief. Any questions on that? Another is proxies that you need to think about. These would be twofold. One is the thought of a living will. What is your decision if something were to happen to you? Do you want to be kept alive? Do you, what's the term pull the plug that became the term. And it's a hard decision to make. I totally understand that. As a pastor, there are times where it's like people will ask, and I'm like, you've got, that's between you and God. Is it murder? I don't believe so. It's a moral and ethical level that we face only because of modern medicine. The thought before would have been you wouldn't have survived anyway to even been on a machine like that. So that isn't even really, that wasn't an issue for 2,000 years of Christianity. It's only a recent issue. People died of simple things like infections. Now we have modern medicine, which can absolutely keep people alive, and there are issues of brain dead, and I've seen and been and talked to people whose children or parents have been brain dead, and that they had to make the decision, what are we going to do and how are we going to deal with this? So the reality there of having a health proxy, a signed who makes your decision. Again, in the state of New York, being a spouse isn't guaranteed that that's the one who could make it. In fact, more and more across the United States, because marriages break up and different things, and it'd be like, ooh, he's dead and I'm still on the insurance policy, pull the plug. Ma'am, it's a cold. Pull the plug, I don't care, pull the plug. Suffocate him if you have to. Get me that insurance. So they have made the sense that you have to have that in writing, even if it's your spouse, which doesn't make total sense to me, but in a crazy other way. And so it's not automatic. You need to have this written down. That being said, you should also think about a power of attorney document. Power of attorney basically says that I can represent this person in a legal way outside of the medical issues. I have a power of attorney for my mother for this, so I can handle most of this probate down in Florida for her, so that she just doesn't have to get lost and swamped in all the details. And so I have a legal obligation. I can't just go and wipe out her bank account and say, I felt the need. Yeah, I'll feel the cuffs too, because that's illegal. But what you do have the ability is to sign if the person is not in a capacity to sign. And it is good, especially if you have one for your spouse, that legally speaking, okay, if there's something that needs to be signed that has to have his signature, the wife can sign it as the POA. And so these are simple documents that you can get all wrapped up together with a will and such, that is just very practical to have. And so, we have that. If you're older, again, you might want to start thinking about putting children on it. So my health proxy is my wife first, and then my son second. That if something happened to my wife, for instance, if we were in a car accident together, and the reason we chose my son over my daughter is simply because he's in the United States and she's not. It's just a practical thing. Right? And so to have the practical, if you have someone here in Rochester that you trust, why pick someone in California to do it? Doesn't make sense. Because sometimes decisions have to be made. And so these are documents you need to think about in the brevity of life. They do not cost that much. Again, you can get these done. They should be reviewed. A lawyer told me once that all your insurances should be reviewed, changed as he does it. He reviews everything during presidential election years. So he's looking at his car insurance, his health insurance, his life insurance. He's looking at his mortgage rates. He's looking at his whatever. He goes and really goes through them every 4 years, because life changes. Life changes, and so there's some of you with the kids running around. I'm like, man, that wasn't us that long ago, and now we've got grandkids that are older than that. And it's like, how did that happen so quickly? And so, as life changes, you review what you need. Right? If you're married, you don't have kids, then you have some kids. Well, you get up some life insurance, and maybe it's time to get the will. And even if you don't own a house, saying, well, I don't have any assets, yeah, but what about the kids? And again, you can do a lot of these online, and they're not that expensive, because all you need is a notary to sign them. And so that is important to think about in growing graceful in life. One last area I want to just touch on, and that is a file somewhere. You need a file somewhere with passwords, account numbers, assets, tax information, credit card information, insurance information that would be helpful if something happened. And this should be written not necessarily, or at least if you have it on a computer, at least the password into that should not be on the computer. When Pastor Ron Bannett passed away, he would pay the church electric bill. He had an app on his phone. He took care of it. His wife didn't know the code to get into and they were in danger of having the church electric shut off. Not because they didn't have the money to pay it. They couldn't access the account to pay it. Pastor Greg then made a statement, you should have a file somewhere. Account numbers, such. I'll tell you what I do. You can weigh this through. My wife and I both have the same, I know her passcode into her phone. She knows my passcode into my phone, which is just wise anyway as a married couple. Then we share one password. So any account she has, I have access to. Any account I have, she has access to. So that makes it very simple. The problem would be then if something happened to both of us, who would have access to both of those accounts or our phones? Because we're not advertising the passcode to our phones. We don't put them out. I know my mother's. I know my mother-in-law's. I think I know my father-in-law's. Don't tell me. Not yet. But I think I do. And so it's important to know these things, that someone else knows them, so that if something else happened, these could be covered. Again, if a car accident happened, and now the administrator has to take care of it and settle all your debts, would he know the credit card numbers? Would he have access? Would there be able to settle these as quickly as possible? And so don't wait. Psalms 90 verse 12 teach us to realize the brevity of life, that we may grow in wisdom. Life is short, and so to prepare for the end is a biblical, practical view of life. And so this is wise. And so if you put it off, if you say, well, we can't afford it or we can't do it, I understand. But you should be trying to get to those places, because God forbid something should happen, it's going to cost far more to take care and resolve some of these than if you have it in writing, if you have insurance, if you have these things set aside. And so it's very practical look at life. Any questions or comments?
Just to clarify, you're not sharing a singular password, your wife and I. You're using a software called 1Password to share many passwords.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Which it generates great passwords, like passwords you go, no one would ever figure this out. 5 asterisk B 2 capital C small d. I don't even know, I'll change them all anyway tomorrow. What'd you do all day? I changed password anyway. My email got hacked, so I'm changing a lot of things anyway. But yeah, so that's just the way it is. But yes, so we both have access. It's on both our phones. She knows the main code to get into all the passwords. I know the main code to get into all the passwords, and so then we have everybody's is there. From frequent flyer mile accounts to credit card information, life insurance information, all of that, is there. Plus, you need a paper somewhere in a box, in a firebox, the box under your bed that you keep your passports and old licenses in and that kind of stuff, That would be the place. Keep it where that if something happened, they can find it and go, okay, this is how I access into that. Or, you just give, if you have children, older children, you just give them an envelope, sealed. Here's all our password code information, and that you can get into. Because Apple will not, even for a spouse, Apple will not break a phone for you. I don't know about Google, but I do know Apple will not, even if for your spouse. They cannot by law, which again doesn't make sense to me, but that's why if you deal with this, it's very practical. Any other questions or comments? Okay, the Lord bless you. We'll pick this up. We'll start, a new Sunday school on the cross next week.